Welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're going way back to Christmas Eve, 1945. A truly sad story, really. The disappearance of the five Sodder children.
Right.
I bet most folks listening already know the basics of this one, but we're going way deeper than just the headlines today. We'll be talking about eyewitness accounts and all those really strange events surrounding the fire, and even, oh yeah, a cryptic letter that showed up years later.
Yeah, it's one that I think has stuck with people, for decades and for good reason, I think. What happened to Maurice, Martha, Louie, Jenny, and Betty? 5 kids just gone.
Yeah, it's hard to even imagine, huh? So let's try to paint a picture of that night. We're in Fayetteville, West Virginia. It's Christmas Eve with the Sodder family, George and Jenny, along with their 10 children.
A big family, yeah. And from everything I've read, they were a hardworking family, very close. George, he owned a trucking business, and they had this nice, comfortable 2-story home. Nothing seemed, out of the ordinary.
Right, a totally typical family at Christmas. But then, that night, everything just changed.
Yeah, so sometime around 1 a.m., Jenny wakes up, right? She smells smoke and realizes, oh no, the house is on fire. So she gets George up right away, and they manage to get out, escape with 4 of their children. But 5 of the kids, they're still trapped upstairs.
And that's where things get, well, I guess you could say even more tragic, right?
Right.
Because despite this huge fire, no bodies were ever found. They were just gone.
Yeah, it's like they just vanished into thin air. And that's not the only strange thing. There were other really strange events that happened that night. The phone lines were cut, for example, which meant that they couldn't call for help right away.
Yeah, I was reading that George, he always kept a ladder propped up against the house, but it was
Yeah.
gone that night. And he even tried to use his work truck to get up to the second floor and rescue the kids, but it wouldn't start, and neither would his car. And he said that they were both working perfectly fine earlier that day.
Yeah, all these seemingly small details are, well, they're a huge part of what makes this case so strange, right? They've had people speculating for decades. And then there's the whole thing with the fire department.
8 hours. I mean, 8 hours. That just seems, well, like way too long.
You would think so, right? Even for back then, 8 hours, Fayetteville wasn't, far from the fire station. By the time they got there, the house was completely gone, burned to the ground.
Okay, so we've got a fire, 5 missing children, and all these really strange things happening. Where do we even start with all this?
Well, I think it makes sense to start with the most popular theory, which is that the kids were kidnapped. It's what the parents, the Sodders, it's what they believed happened. They thought that their kids were taken before the fire started and that the whole fire thing was just, a way to distract everyone.
Yeah, I guess that does make sense, but what evidence was there for that, really? Anything solid?
Well, there were several people who saw things, different eyewitness accounts, and those definitely added to the suspicion that something wasn't right. For instance, someone said they saw a car speeding away from the Sodders' house that night, and a bus driver, he claimed that he had seen, get this, balls of fire being thrown at the house earlier that night.
Wow, that sounds like arson. But why would anyone target the Sodders like that?
That's the big question, right? Well, some folks believe it could be connected to George's past. You see, he was an Italian immigrant, and he was very outspoken about his dislike of Mussolini, and he was against, the fascist regime back in Italy.
So maybe someone with connections to the Mafia in Italy, they decided to get revenge.
That's one theory, yeah. It's possible that they saw the fire as, a warning, and then taking the children was, a way to keep George quiet.
And one of the things I read mentioned that George, he got this really creepy warning from a stranger just a few months before the fire happened. The stranger told him that his house was going to go up in smoke and that his kids would be taken because of his outspoken views on Mussolini.
Yeah, and then years later, George met another mysterious man who told him that the kids were actually safe, but he needed to stop looking for them. Things like that definitely, they add fuel to the kidnapping theory.
It's almost like whoever was behind it, they were sending a message, right? Stop digging or else.
Right, and when you combine those events with, George's past and all the other weird things that happened that night, well, it leads some people to believe that the kids were kidnapped, possibly by someone with ties to the Mafia or, just someone with a grudge against George.
But if that's true, if the kids were really kidnapped, wouldn't someone have said something by now? I mean, after all these years, you'd think there'd be some kind of clue, right?
You'd think so, but the fact that there's still no solid evidence after all this time, it's just baffling. Some people say that whoever kidnapped the kids, if that's what happened, they were really good at covering their tracks and keeping things quiet.
It's It's kind of a scary thought, isn't it? A mystery that might never be solved. Just a family left wondering for all those years what happened.
It really is a tough one to figure out, this whole case. But we should talk about the other theories, even though, well, they aren't as well known, I guess. Some people think that the kids died in the fire, and the fire was so hot that their remains were totally incinerated, so there was nothing left to find.
But wouldn't there be something left?
Yeah.
Even just like little pieces of bone. I remember reading that the fire chief, he even said that the fire wouldn't have been hot enough to completely destroy human bones.
You're right to think about that, yeah. It's one of the big reasons why people don't think it was just a tragic accident. Plus, some other things from the house survived the fire, like appliances and stuff. I mean, they were damaged, but they were still there in the debris.
That is weird.
Yeah.
And then there were those unidentified bones that were found in a cemetery not that far away back in 1949. They never actually proved that they were from the Sodder children, but it definitely makes you wonder.
It does, yeah. A pathologist looked at the bones and said they were from a child, but they couldn't ever say for sure if it was one of the Sodder kids. It's just another one of those loose ends in this case, you know?
Yeah, like every time we think we're getting close to figuring things out, another question pops up. What about how fast the house burned down? Was there anything strange about that?
Yeah, actually, some fire experts have said that it burned way too fast, even for a house made of wood. So that has made some people think that maybe someone used something to make the fire burn faster, like gasoline or something.
So maybe it was arson then, either
Oh.
to like hide a kidnapping or maybe just as an act of revenge. It feels like we keep coming back to the idea that someone did this on purpose.
Yeah, it's really hard to ignore that possibility when you think about everything, right?
Yeah.
The phone lines being cut, the ladder being gone, the car's not starting. It makes it seem more likely that it was planned and not just an accident.
And then there's that letter that Jenny got in 1968. It's like, that's when things got even more crazy. I can't even imagine what it would be like to get a picture and a message from your son after you thought he had died over 20 years ago.
It was a huge shock for the family, that letter. It gave them hope again, and it just added a whole other level of mystery to everything. The picture itself was, well, it's interesting. The young man in it looked a lot like Louis Sodder.
And then there's that message on the back, the one that no one can figure out. It said, Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, ill boys, A90132 or 35. What do you think it means?
It's definitely cryptic. People have been debating about what it means for years, and no one knows for sure. Some people think that Frankie could be a nickname for one of Louis's brothers, so maybe it means that he was, like, in contact with one of his siblings.
And what about that part that says lil boys? Could that mean that there were other kids involved, maybe other kids that were kidnapped or taken?
It's possible, yeah, but, I mean, we just don't know. And those numbers at the end, A90132 or 35, they could be anything. Maybe it's a code or a phone number or even, like, part of an address. Who knows?
Ugh, it's so frustrating, isn't it? Like trying to put together a puzzle, but half the pieces are missing.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, a really important piece of this puzzle is gone. Remember that private investigator that the Sodders hired to look into the letter? Well, he disappeared too. No one ever found him.
Oh, right, right. They hired him to find out who sent the letter and to see if it really was from Louis, and then poof, the investigator just vanished.
Yeah, it's like another layer of tragedy and mystery, right, on top of everything else. Maybe the investigator found something that put him in danger. Or maybe someone made him disappear to keep the secrets, whatever they are, about the children's disappearance. Or maybe it was just a coincidence. I mean, we really don't know.
There are so many things we don't know about this case. It makes you wonder if anyone will ever find out what really happened to the Sodder children.
It's a question that people have been asking for, well, over 75 years now. And I hate to say it, but as more time passes, it gets harder to solve mysteries like this. Evidence gets lost or ruined, people forget things, and witnesses, well, they don't live forever.
That's true. But sometimes, even after a long time, something small can be found, some new clue, right? Maybe that will happen with this case.
Yeah, you're right. We can't rule that out. New evidence can turn up,
Ugh.
or we might get new technology that helps us figure out old cases like this. It happens more than you think. Look at what DNA testing has done, right? I mean, it's changed everything about how we investigate crime.
That's a good point. So even though this case, the Sodder case, even though it's still officially unsolved, there's still a chance, right, that we'll find out the truth someday.
I think so, yeah. There's always hope. But until then, it's a case that keeps us all wondering. It reminds us that even in ordinary places, really strange things can happen. And sometimes those things lead to mysteries that, well, they might never be solved.
Yeah, it's a story that I think really sticks with people, partly because of the mystery, but also, because it's about family and
Yeah.
loss and trying to find the truth. Those are things we can all understand.
Absolutely. And the fact that it happened at Christmas time, when everyone is supposed to be happy and celebrating, that makes it even more sad. It's like this contrast between the warm and happy feelings of Christmas and then this terrible thing that happened to the Sodder family. It makes you think about how fragile life can be.
It definitely does. It reminds us that even when we're happy and celebrating, bad things can still happen. And sometimes those bad things, they leave us with questions that we may never have the answers to. It's kind of amazing how this case still gets so much attention, even after all these years. It's like people just have to try and figure it out, like they're drawn to it.
It's true, yeah. The Sodder case, it's like it's become this obsession for a lot of people, I think, amateur detectives and even like professional investigators. And I think it's because it really taps into something deep in us, like a basic human need to find answers, to make sense of things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like we're wired to look for patterns and try to solve puzzles, right?
Exactly. In this case, it is a real puzzle, a complicated one with pieces missing and all sorts of things that might lead you down the wrong path. It's a story that just begs for an answer. And because there isn't one, a clear one anyway, well, it keeps drawing people back in, trying to make sense of it all.
But I think it's more than just the mystery itself. I think there's something about the human side of this story that people connect with. I mean, the Sodder family, they never gave up, right? They kept looking for their kids for like decades, even when it seemed like there was nothing left to find.
Yeah, that's one of the most incredible things about this whole thing, their determination. Think about that billboard they put up, right? The one with their kids' faces on it. It was up for 40 years. It's like, well, it just shows how powerful love can be and hope that maybe, somehow, their children were out there somewhere.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Even when something so awful happens, the human spirit can still be so strong.
Hmm.
But as we start wrapping up our deep dive into this mystery, what are some of the key things that you hope people listening will take away from all of this?
Hmm. Well, I think the biggest thing is to remember to be, well, a little skeptical when you're looking into this case, or any unsolved mystery, really, and to be open to different possibilities. It's easy to get caught up in all the theories and rumors, especially with, the internet and all that. There's a lot of stuff out there.
Oh, yeah, for sure. There's a ton of speculation, but we got to be careful, right? We can't just treat guesses and rumors like they're facts.
Right. It's all about thinking critically, looking at the evidence closely, and being open to different points of view. And I guess the other important thing to remember is that this is, well, at the heart of it, it's a real tragedy. 5 kids disappeared, their family was left heartbroken, and it's something that the whole community has been dealing with all these years.
It's a story about loss and sadness and never giving up hope. And yeah, finding the truth and getting justice is really important, but I think we also need to remember to be like sensitive and respectful to the people whose lives were changed by this.
I agree. The Sodder children disappearing, it's a case that, well, it's probably going to keep fascinating people and confusing people for a long time. And we may never know for sure what happened to them. But the fact that people keep looking for answers, that they want justice for them, and that the family never lost hope, I think that says a lot about what it means to be human.
It really does. And maybe someday someone will find something, some new piece of evidence, or maybe there'll be a new technology that can help us figure out what happened all those years ago. Until then, the mystery just keeps going.
It does. The mystery remains. But so does the memory of those kids and the love that their family had for them, a love that never faded.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into one of America's biggest mysteries. We hope you'll keep thinking about this case, do your own research, and let us know what you think. Maybe, just maybe, someone listening right now has a piece of the puzzle that could finally help solve this thing. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep searching, and never forget about the human stories behind these mysteries.